Algeria, where elections are held, but actually do not produce the radical changes expected by some part of the population. And the same goes also for other countries. In the case of Libya, we are witnessing a process of political institutional transition. There will be elections possibly in December, according to the schedule of the United Nations mission in Libya. But we have to understand that what people are expecting in Libya after 10 years and more of conflict is the fact that they receive normal services like electricity. Electricity in Libya, which is for something that we take for granted elsewhere, has become a big political issue in terms of also legitimacy of the governance, their ability to provide energy all day long without interruption. Another important element that sometimes we forget, because we analysts and diplomats sometimes become fixed with security in terms of strategy. But what is really more important in these countries is the issue of human security. And through the pandemic, for instance, we have been witnessing this element. Healthcare is a component of human security. But what Europe has really offered so far to the region is a question mark in terms of sharing experience, sharing also knowledge, not to mention the vaccine, okay? Because this is also another element that would be a factor of mutual trust, rebuilding mutual trust between the two shores of the Mediterranean. It is quite significant that when the Prime Minister Draghi paid a visit recently on April the 6th to Libya, one of the only agreement that was signed was between the Italian Research Institute for Health and the homologue in Libya, stressing the fact that this has become more and more an important element of bilateral cooperation. There are many other things like restarting the operation of the airports in Libya in order to allow the country to be reconnected with the international community at large, internal transportation, and so on. But human security, I think, is a prism through which we have to look at the region. Then there are also other expectations from the people on the ground in the region. Is, for instance, the fact that countries start to cooperate in order to alleviate the problem that are left over from past crises. I think, for instance, of the border between Algeria and Morocco, still closed, which is quite a paradox in a region that, on the other hand, claims to become more and more integrated. So integration is another keyword that is becoming, unfortunately, meaningless. And we, as Europe, I would say, should need to reinforce it, to strengthen. One element that has played a role both in Algeria, in Egypt, in Libya also, is the political aspect of Islam. Rather than talking about Islamism or political Islam, I would prefer this metaphor rather than describing it directly as political, and Islam is in the same sentence. So I would say that this has been a challenge for the stabilization of the countries, but it's more and more becoming less an argument. For instance, the international community came to realize that the Muslim Brotherhood can be considered problematic from one country, but in the Maghreb, for instance, the leverage of the Muslim Brotherhood in political terms is not so important in terms of impact on institutions and especially on the electoral fluxes. So these are, if you want, we have in front of us, instead of a crisis. I remember that when I became the director of the policy planning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I found a document that was created by the unit that was called the arc of crisis related to the Middle East. My proposal was, why don't we call that the arc of change? Not necessarily in a good direction, but there is a change in the region that we tend to consider always in terms of crisis. And I think we have to reconsider also a sort of process of decolonizing our narrative on about the region, and this would be very very helpful. My final remark has to do with the people-to-people relations, and when I talk of people-to-people, it also refer to some stumbling blocks like the visa, for instance. Another element which is of political significance in the region is how to deal with the understandable requirement of the Schengen space and the expectation of young people to travel, to study, to go back and forth without facing refusal in terms of their possibility to travel and to study elsewhere. So this is another human component that sometimes we underestimate and even neglect in our political analysis. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Excellent remarks. Thank you very much for these thoughts, which are very provocative and raise the question of, where the Euro-Mediterranean dialogue stands. Some decades after it was launched with rather grand expectations, and what has it now been reduced to? Has it been reduced to, vaccine transfer, or is there still an ambitious agenda related here? But let me turn now to Amr Hamzawy, and let me introduce him briefly. Many of you already know him, but he studied, of course, in Egypt, in the Netherlands, in Germany. He's been an associate professor of political science at Cairo University and at the American University in Cairo. He is also a longtime fellow of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. His publications have focused on democratization processes, especially in Egypt, and his new book, which came out in 2019, is called On the Habits of Neo-Authoritarianism, Politics in Egypt between 2013 and 2019. And this is something that he knows personally quite well as a former member of the People's Assembly, of course, the Egyptian parliament, after being elected in the first parliamentary elections in Egypt following the 2011 revolution. Dr. Hamzawy is also a former member of the Egyptian National Council for Human Rights and a contributor to Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I give you now the floor, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to join you and join Reset as ever. Without losing my 7 to 8 minutes in commending Federica for her great work on publishing the book. She did a wonderful job in getting all of us to contribute and getting us to contribute on time and in editing the book. So thank you so much, Federica. You did a wonderful job, and I'm happy the book is out. I would like to start my remarks by following Ambassador Pasquale Ferrara, who just spoke, in highlighting one key element, which is the question of electoral democracy and how does the population in the region or different populations in the region look at it. And I'm basing my analysis on a set of surveys, which the project Arab Barometer, which is a project of Princeton University in the US, along with a set of public opinion surveying institutions in the region, in the Middle East. Princeton University, as well as these public opinion surveying institutions, have been publishing surveys about popular trends throughout the last 15 years, but especially in the last decade, they have focused a lot on popular trends and how Arabs or majorities in different Arab countries in the MENA region have come to look at the question of electoral democracy. And I couldn't but agree with what the ambassador just said. Electoral democracy has become less and less of a popular priority. It's always been, by the way. If you look at surveys from the region before 2011 or after 2011, you will find as top priorities of Arabs, of clear majorities, of course, improvement in economic conditions, social and living conditions, all the way from poverty to unemployment to, of course, reducing unemployment and poverty, fighting corruption, different items which we can identify as related to good governance. The question of democracy in the sense of rotation of power, electoral-based rotation of power, in the sense of the rule of law, has not been on the top of the priority list of Arab citizens throughout the last years, and the last decade did not do much in the sense of changing it. In fact, if you look at popular trends in a place like Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, where the difference is becoming quite striking, that approval ratings for democracy as the wished for form of governance has been, approval ratings have been decreasing, not increasing, which in a sense is a reflection of what has been happening in the region in the last decade. We had two waves of democratically spirited uprisings in 2011 in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria. Primarily, Bahrain was quickly shut off for regional reasons. And a second wave in 2018 and 2019 in Iraq, Lebanon, Sudan, and Algeria. And so the two waves have basically moved around North Africa and the Levant primarily, and we can include Yemen as well. And then you see these different countries, three of them have been pushed into civil strife or situations of civil wars, ongoing civil strife or ongoing civil wars. Syria and Yemen, up until now, Libya is stabilizing, fragile pieces emerging. I'm hoping it will stay. And elsewhere, we have quite problematic political and social manifestations and economic manifestations of mass mobilization in the last decade. In Egypt and Tunisia, in Morocco and Algeria, in Sudan and Iraq and Lebanon, it seems that people's preferences are moving away from electoral democracy and democratic governance as the wished for form of governance. And we really have to look at that and sort of analyze it and see why it's come to this, be it in relation to crises which unfolded in Egypt and Tunisia right after the uprisings, crises which continue to exist in Tunisia, for example, up until now, where we see a pluralist politics, but a dysfunctional formal political scene where the president cannot cooperate with the parliament and the parliament is not willing to cooperate with the president, and Tunisian politics or political dynamics continue to be in a stalemate, not resulting in any viable solutions for a deteriorating social and economic environment, which many Tunisians have come to suffer from. And because of that suffering, they are moving away from asking for more electoral democracy, since it hasn't brought much in terms of benefiting citizens socially and economically. The same issue was very relevant in Egypt in 2013 and led to an end to a brief experiment in pluralist politics, which basically did not benefit any key stakeholders. Even those who took to the street in 2011 to demand democratic change were quite disenchanted and came back to demand a return to a one-man rule in 2013. Algeria, as you mentioned, Jonathan, continues to struggle with a huge popular effort. People are still demonstrating in Algeria every Friday since almost 3 years, with a huge popular effort. Algeria continues to struggle to move away from the era and the legacy of Bouteflika, and not much has emerged in the sense of democratic reforms. Continues to be a highly contested issue, and we do not know where Algeria will be going. Sudan has a fragile agreement between civilian and military forces, a power sharing agreement of sorts. Would it stabilize or not? No one really knows. The anti-sectarian movement, very impressive popular movements in Lebanon and Iraq, which really pushed populated mainly by young Lebanese and young Iraqi citizens. And as you of course know, 60% of all Arabs are under the age of 25. So we really have a clearly young majority in the region, and this young majority, I'm not saying it's a foregone conclusion that it's in favor of democracy. No, young Arabs think in too many different ways. But in Iraq and Lebanon, there was a drive for anti-sectarianism, which was contained, if not basically brought to an end, by the strength and solidity of sectarian politics that continues to dominate both Lebanon and Iraq. So overall, and it's my first point, I guess we really have to sort of look back at the outcome of the last decade without coming to grand assessments such as democratic uprisings have failed, or democracy is not is a no-go zone for Arabs. But I believe we really have to come back to evaluate empirically, based on empirical evidence, that what the promise of electoral democracy, what the promise of peaceful rotation of power based on the ballot box have had in the sense of impacting the fate of Arab nations throughout the last 10 years. And I believe public opinion surveys really highlight the fact that Arabs are more interested in having good governance. And there are some good examples emerging in the Gulf primarily, where transparency, where good governance, different elements of good governance are emerging and are impacting the region in the wider sense, away from democratic governance as such. Number one. Number two, and here I'm moving into how to look at the region in terms of challenges as of now. I believe, and it's really an issue where I would like to hear from our European participants how they see it, especially because we see different crises in the making in the region, and not much is being done to tackle them. And let me outline 3 different crises very briefly, which are currently in the making in the region. And I'm not sure whether enough attention is being given to them, and they have the potential of destabilizing the region more than it's been destabilized throughout the last 10 years. And while agreeing with what the ambassador said in relation to fragmentation within the Arab League, within the Gulf Cooperation Council, different regional fora have come to be dysfunctional or less relevant. And we do have a great deal of conflicts within the region, be it between key actors such as Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran on the other hand, or for a very long time, between Turkey and Egypt. And these conflicts have always materialized in neighboring countries. Yemen, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Yemen being pushed to a civil war due to the intervention of the 2 key actors. Libya, which had a long fate of instability due to different interventions by regional actors, now coming to stabilize when regional actors have improved the relations, primarily Turkey and Egypt, among other actors, of course, and other factors. But what I'm saying is we really have a region which is not only dysfunction in the sense of regional cooperation councils not doing much, but we have a great deal of conflicts going on. And of course, there is no sense of an established mechanism to cooperate or to solve security questions. And I believe when the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership was launched several years ago, almost 2 decades ago, the promise was to help the region stabilize, to help the region find a peaceful mechanism to solve conflicts, not only the Arab-Israeli conflicts or border conflicts such as Algeria and Morocco or elsewhere, but to help the region find a way into a cooperative mode peacefully. It hasn't been delivered upon, and we see a region which is suffering from more conflict than ever before. And I see 3 crises in the making, which are, to my mind, very alarming, and not much has been done to tackle them throughout the last years. Number 1, in reference to Egypt and Sudan and the Nile Basin in general, the question of the potential of water conflicts between Egypt and Sudan on the one hand and Ethiopia on the other hand. Again, the background of the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and its potential impacts on Egypt and Sudan. This is a question where negotiations between the 3 countries have been going on for over 10 years, where attempts to mediate by the US, by the European Union, by international institutions, including the UN and the World Bank, have been out there as well, but not much has been achieved. And we're approaching a moment in the crisis which has a huge potential of increasing conflict levels. And I'm not sure whether anyone is paying attention to the crisis of the Renaissance Dam and its impacts or not, but I'm seeing an escalation of rhetoric on all sides in the region, in Egypt, in Sudan, and in Ethiopia. And if these countries will not find strong mediators on their sides to help broker an agreement of sorts, an agreement, of course, is possible, and different scenarios have been pushed forward by experts on how to solve the question in a fair manner, where water resources are enough for Ethiopian developmental needs as well as for Sudanese and Egyptian needs, but not much has been done. And Europe has, for reasons which I could not understand, decided to stay on the sideline. Mediation was very brief, and then Europe departed the scene throughout the last year. So that's number 1 crisis. The second crisis, I will finish soon, Jonathan, in its, the 2 crises only. The second is the collapse of Lebanese politics, where the anti-sectarian movement in 2018 and 2019 demanded change. Not much has been delivered, and as a result, we have come to a stalemate where Lebanese politics, even in its very sectarian dynamics, are not functioning. A government has not been formed in Lebanon for over a year. We continue to have a void in Lebanon, resulting in extreme deterioration in social and economic conditions, and in a devaluation of the Lebanese currency almost close to 90%. A huge crisis, and no one is paying attention. Only France has tried to mediate, but not much has been happening as well. And it has a potential of destabilizing not only Lebanon, but neighboring countries as well. And Syria is already in a civil war context. The third and last crisis, which I would like to outline, is related to North Africa and primarily to Morocco, where if you go back, and of course I mentioned the 2 big waves, 2011, 2018, and 19, in the sense of popular mobilization. We had a wave of mobilization in Morocco, in the Rif region, discriminated against, a marginalized region where the Berber population, or predominantly the Berber population, lives. And people took to the street to demand change for social and to address social and economic grievances. So what I'm saying, there's a crisis of ongoing social and economic grievances which are not being tackled. The region looked to Europe for help to address these questions, and not much has been happening since the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership was launched. So I'm saying these are 3 crises which are of regional significance, which have the potential of destabilizing the region even more, and not much has been happening. And if we would like to look at what should be done, I guess we should look at the potential of cooperation between countries in the region, helped by external actors, primarily Europe, which will always stay close geostrategically to the region. So let me stop here, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amr. That was really an excellent tour d'horizon, and gives a great overview of just how broad and deep these challenges are. And so I thank you for being so rigorous about about the way that you laid it out. That was really helpful. There's already a question for you in the chat, which we'll get to at the end. But let me first turn to Aymen Bukhanmi and to thank him for being here from Tunisia. Bukhanmi is a professor at the University of Kairouan. He did his doctorate in history and civilization at the Sorbonne on the British imperialism of free trade. And his thesis developed the historical dimensions of geoeconomics. He studies the relations and interactions between states. And since 2011, he has authored many books and articles, including one called The Arab Autumn, on the contradiction between revolution and democracy. And he is also a contributor to the excellent volume edited by Federica Zoya, for which the link is now included in the chat. Let me turn now to Aymen Bukhanmi, and thank you again for being here, Professor. Please wait, we have to unmute you, I'm sorry. Or if you can unmute yourself. We cannot hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Can you see me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
No, it's all good now. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, thank you very much, and I would like to start by thanking Federica and all those who contributed in producing this book. Thank you very much for all your efforts for us. I would like to focus on the economic aspect of the transformations that are happening in the region, and I would like to remind you that if we had uprisings and revolutions, it is first of all because the economic systems and economic structures of our countries were not good enough to answer the expectations of the population. In Tunisia, for example, the state developed a system of, let us say, economic management based on simplistic understandings of values such as equality. For example, for the old regime, for Ben Ali's regime, in order to ensure equality, you have, for example, to have universities everywhere. For example, if you have a university in Tunis, you have to have the equivalent in the interior regions, in Kairouan, in the northwest, etc. The problem with that policy was that it raised the expectations of our young people. In other words, these people started to look down on the jobs of their parents. Most of them were farmers. It was a strategic mistake because the state did not invest in order to make these people economically useful according to their particular economic environment. And in addition to that, they created expectations that could not be met by our economic system. The result was growing frustration. The result was widespread joblessness and a refusal to reintegrate what was available in these particular regions. This is an example to remind people that if an uprising happened in Tunisia, if we witnessed a revolution, we should never forget that there are economic and social foundations for it. There were also political foundations that are very well known. The problem when the revolution came, it did not solve the old problems, and it created new ones. It created new ones because of our reading. At least one of the reasons I can think of, our reading of the of revolution, and especially of democracy, is not a liberal one. In our Arab world, we understand democracy, I'm sorry, but almost in Marxist terms. That's why democracy, as Hamza mentioned, understood in its electoral meaning, does not always appear in the top list of priorities. What people need and what people want is services, goods provided by the state. This culture meant that while we were talking about democracy in what sounded liberal terms, we were expecting a democracy almost in the popular meaning of the term. In other words, Tunisia, for example, despite its relative success, has entered democracy from its, let us say, populist door, in order to avoid the exaggeration I made a few minutes ago when I spoke of a Marxist understanding, because that was a metaphor, that was an exaggeration. So we have a serious problem making the distinction between what is right and what is a duty. This is a fundamental issue that may sound intellectual, but it is not, because when politics is being dealt with, the discourse that surrounds it is usually fundamentally interventionist, promising many things, continuing to raise expectations, and as soon as the discourse is over, after the elections, for example, it is impossible to deliver on those unrealistic promises. I think that there were two kinds of revolution in Tunisia. The first one asked for the end of privileges. The second one asked for a kind of sharing privileges. And I feel that that the second version has been much, much stronger. My feeling is that this is also the case in Algeria. For example, when I follow the Herat, their slogans, I feel that the aim at the end of the day does not seem to end privileges in order to head toward a kind of a meritocratic system with rational solutions and individual responsibility and liberal solutions driven by a market economy. No, the slogans tend to be much more collectivist, much more asking for further services by the state. The problem is that these states are not in a position to deliver on these promises. In addition to that, in Tunisia, for example, the revolution hit hard many strategic sectors. For example, and in line with what I've been saying, Tunisia is an important producer of phosphate. And phosphate was produced, but is being produced by a state-owned enterprise. It was protected by force, almost by military force, before the revolution, because it is a key strategic issue, and the state needed to make sure that production continues despite some problems and some uprisings in that region. With the revolution and the fall of the regime, the use of force has become impossible. No government would dare to take the risk of such an action. As a consequence, this resource has been dealt with regionally as a kind of cash cow. Everyone wants their share of the cake. There are good arguments, there are human arguments even. For example, this production is very polluting, and the civil society there says we need to be compensated for that, which is strong as an argument, but which is economically not sustainable. I give you just one figure. In 2009, there were almost 8,000 people working in this enterprise. And now, after 10 years, more than 10 years, we have something like 25,000 people working either directly or indirectly. And in addition to that, the production of the enterprise have been divided by half. So it is, if we calculate on the basis of the productivity, it is like we are saying that a worker in this enterprise has lost something like more than 70% or 80% of his or her productivity. And I can say very easily from that this situation is unsustainable. Finally, and I am going to conclude by that, we cannot forget when we talk about economy, the unluck, how unlucky a country like Tunisia has been. First of all, after 2011, some strategic sectors were hit by violence, by instability, and especially by some terrorist attacks. So tourism, for example, which accounts for something like 9%, 8 to 9% of our GDP, had been hit very hard at that time. And as soon as we started to pick up, we have been hit again by even a worse enemy. You know it very well now, COVID-19. So there is, of course, room for hope. Tunisia is relatively small in terms of its economic needs. All that Tunisia needs in order to revitalize its economy, I think, amounts to what an enterprise like General Motors got from its government after the crisis of 2018. So the smallness of this Tunisian economy allows it to be much more adaptable than other countries. It is, I think, the best structural foundation for hope. But without, I think, international help, without the help of our democratic friends, and without real reform in our economic situation, I think the democratic transition is in danger. Of course, people tend to see the problems, the political problems, the stalemate mentioned by Hamza about our political system, but I think that is not very dangerous. I think that we can find solutions for that. We have traditions for in finding solutions for such political problems. What we don't know how to deal with is the economic crisis. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for these insights on really, I think, very fundamental issues about democratization and the conditions of democratization. historically, what constitutes readiness for democracy on the one hand, but also what are the changing desires of people in a changing economic context. So I thank you very much for that. I will now turn to Federica Zoya, whom I've already briefly introduced, but she is the scientific coordinator at Reset. She began as a journalist in Milan. She then worked in Brussels and finally in Egypt. As a reporter on North Africa and the Middle East. She's worked for all of the major Italian outlets and has been covering the MENA region for Reset Dialogues, as well as for Avvenire. Her analyses have been published widely, and as mentioned, she is the editor of this new book on Tunisia and North Africa since the revolutions. I now hand the floor over to Federica. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks to all the authors, my authors, the authors of this wonderful monograph. They were able to provide, I think, not only food for thought on what has happened in North Africa and Middle East in the last decade, but also to look beyond the present. And personally, today, I'd like to turn the spotlight on Jordan, the small Arab kingdom often overlooked by the chronicles and yet really strategic and also fragile, as we realized recently. And so strategic as a joint, we can say, between territories and political entities that are constantly in a sort of friction between them. So a quick remind on Jordanian recent news. Suddenly, 10 days ago, more or less, on the 3rd of April, we heard rumors on a conspiracy to oust King Abdallah II. And then we learned that Prince Hamza, his half-brother, was arrested, was placed under house arrest, accused of a conspiracy, and in particular to cooperate with foreign entities. Then Hamza wrote a letter or signed an official letter and renewed a sort of a oath of allegiance to the king and to the royal family. And finally, he appeared alongside King Abdallah in an official press conference. And just yesterday, this is the last news that we have, the announcement that the state security court will try all the people arrested, 18 persons, except for Prince Hamza. So to better understand, I think the serious dimension of this crisis, I'd like to underline at least one name among the 20 arrested people, Bassem Hawadallah. The international press spoke in a very hastily way, I think, of Bassem Hawadallah as the former head of the royal court. But it is, I think, appropriate to point out that we are talking about a really prominent figure, public figure in Jordan, with internationally recognized financial skills and ministerial roles in Jordan since the 90s. And I'm talking about the Ministry of Economy, strategic ministries, and strong connections with all the international financial community. Okay, so this is, I think, an element that we have to consider. And of course, in recent years, Awadallah was also an advisor to Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, and he had a double passport, a Saudi one and a Jordanian one. Then to date, we know that Prince Hamza will not be prosecuted. And we know that, according to Prime Minister Bashar al-Ghassawaneh, the fact is that the affair has been resolved within the royal family. Okay, but the story of course, runs along two different tracks. The one inside the family, the royal family, and which has to do with probably Hamza's dissatisfaction. He was sidelined, he had been sidelined twice on his way to the throne. But there's also a strong regional track for all these crises. Let's add another element to better reconstruct all the story. I'd like to point out the arrival of a Saudi delegation, a delegation of Saudi prominent diplomats in Jordan, just one day after the arrest of Abdallah and Prince Hamza. Just one day, 24 hours. Why? Officially, for clarification and to give a political support to Amman and to the Hashemite family. But according to other sources, Riyadh's goal was to have Abdallah released as soon as possible and probably to accompany him to Saudi Arabia. And we have a source, anonymous one, of course, telling the Washington Post, and I'm quoting, the Saudis say they will not leave the country without him. They seem to be concerned about what he might say. So the question is, has the Jordanian crisis completely disappeared? Probably not, and I think on the contrary, that we have to expect something more. Why? Because Jordan is an iron ally to the United States and for the European Union, of course, and has always been considered a stable country, a compact country, but now all its structural weaknesses are coming to the surface. And why this? Because till now, probably we ignored the pressure, the social pressure in Jordan. First of all, because of millions of refugees, Palestinians, Iraqis, and in the recent years, Syrians. And because of the pandemic, and which is severely tested the equilibrium, the social equilibrium and political equilibrium. And also because in Jordan, there have been slow economic development, too much slow, and an introduction of political reforms that are not courageous enough. And I'm giving you only two figures on unemployment in the last quarter of the year 2020 in Jordan, 24.7%. And this is the official one. So we can imagine that maybe in an official one, there's something much worse. And then on the percentage of the society in Jordan, 34% of Jordanians are refugees. So, even more than a third of the society. So the Hashemite kingdom is an attractive country for all of those aim to fragment every corner of the Near East and Middle East in order to infiltrate impoverished societies and divided societies. It has already happened with Iraq, Syria, Yemen, etc. And the same forces now are trying to take profit of Lebanese crisis. The Jordanian territory has all the characteristics to end up in the crosshairs. And I mean, it has a strategic outlet to the sea, the Red Sea, discrete reserves of hydrocarbons, and is located on the route of gas and oil pipelines between Asia and Mediterranean. And it could be even sacrificed to create a Palestinian state or to become a Syrian province under the influence of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, if probably the Western allies won't watch enough. Why is it reasonable to think of any Saudi and Emirates responsibility in the attempted coup? Because at this moment they are losing political ground in the region every day. They are losing in Yemen, and they were defeated in some sort in Libya and Syria, and they are testifying strong axis forming between Turkey and Egypt, a political and economic axis between them. So all this makes us think that those with their backs to the wall, especially now that we have a new American administration, wants to reopen, wants to recreate a situation of instability in the region, and maybe not only in Jordan, but in Lebanon or Oman, etc. If for this reason, it's so important strategic support by Europe and United States to a concrete economic and political path of reform in Near and Middle East. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Federica. That was extremely detailed and really informative. I did not know a lot of those really interesting and key aspects of the unfolding drama, and so I thank you very much for that. The last speaker, and I apologize that we are coming to him somewhat late. Just we are running slightly over time, and I'm sorry for that. But we are very pleased to have with us Ambassador Patrizio Fondi, who is also, of course, of Reset Dialogues. Ambassador Fondi most recently served as the ambassador of the European Union to the United Arab Emirates. He has a 30-year experience serving different roles in Italian diplomacy. He also served as the ambassador of Italy to Jordan, as well as diplomatic advisor to the Italian Minister of Cultural Heritage. Ambassador Fondi has a number of honors associated with his career, and we are very pleased that he is now part of the Reset Dialogues team. And I'm very pleased to hand the floor to him now, and thank you for being here.
Can you hear me? Because at the beginning there was some problem. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening to all participants, first of all, and thanks for this gathering on the occasion of the book curated by Federica, the excellent book. My issue is a bit out of the North Africa region, but is could be seen in the context of the MENA region as a whole. Is the Gulf. Now, the Gulf until 10 years ago was a region quite quiet and not really in the game in the MENA region, at least not so active. Mostly they were kind of passive soft power, relying on oil, power, economy, and some kind of religion influence. Saudi Arabia, of course, as Mecca and Medina. Now, since the last 10 years, we can say that the Gulf came suddenly to the light in the MENA region, to the point that some people speak about Gulfization of the Middle East or Gulf moment. And this change was, I think, very important in order to understand the development in the whole Middle East in the last 10 years. The organization which is in the Gulf, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, is not so, let's say, relevant to our purposes, because unfortunately, as an organization, the outcome, the efficiency, the effectiveness of this body was not so, let's say, relevant in the last years for many reasons. First of all, for the fragmentation, already referred by other speakers, but also because there is no military interoperability among the different army of these countries. So they cannot act as a whole. Always they need to have the support of other external actors. But still, if we take this country as single states, one by one, they had a strong influence and they passed from a soft power to a hard power, assertive stand. So we noticed that in the last 10 years, a kind of shift of power in the region from the traditional capitals, were really in the center of the MENA politics. I refer in particular Baghdad, Damascus, for example, that today are totally out of the game because the event which happened there put this country in a situation to look inward and not outward for internal problems, as we know very well. And now the capital in the Gulf, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Riyadh, came out as the real influential actor in the region. Not only as a hard power, as I say, with military action, but also with a mediation role that once was maybe in other capitals. It came, for example, to Oman. We can think about the nuclear pact for Iran, was practically conceived thanks to contacts between USA and Iran in Muscat. Or maybe we can think about the contacts between Taliban and the USA about Afghanistan. Was Doha, is still Doha, the place where these meetings take place. So as you can see, the Gulf really had an impact in the last 10 years, which was not imaginable 15 or 20 years ago. Another factor who facilitated this is the fact that a new generation came to the scene, and I refer in particular to the two very well-known people, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Riyadh, and MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince in the Emirates. Both of them, as you know, are not the formal boss of the two countries, but de facto they are the rulers. They are young people. They are very ambitious. They don't have, let's say, the prudence and the caution of the predecessor. So also this generational factor played a role in the Gulf. By the way, the Gulf is changing the people ruling the country. Even in Kuwait, recently the emir passed away. In Oman, also the Sultan Qaboos has been replaced by the new sultan, and even Qatar, the father passed some years ago the power to the son, the present Al Thani emir. Now, we can consider that these countries, the Gulf was in an aggressive stand until more or less 2019, 2020, for many reasons. First of all, because after the Arab Spring, 2011, they felt in danger, especially because of the Muslim Brotherhood influence, which could jeopardize the political structure of the monarchies. So they had a lot of interventions in the MENA region. I just remind very quickly Egypt, for example, the passage from Morsi to Al-Sisi, of course, they played a role. In Syria, as you know, Saudi Arabia and Qatar were very active, a bit less, maybe the Emirates. Libya, we know very well the role played by the UAE on one side and Qatar on the other. But also I want to remind two areas where the assertive stand was very evident and very strong militarily. One is Yemen, especially Saudi Arabia, but followed at the beginning at least by the Emirates, and also the Horn of Africa, where there is a strong rivalry between Qatar and Turkey on one side and UAE and Saudi Arabia on the other side. We think about Somalia, we think about Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia. I mean, there is really a rivalry which is very strong. I also would like to make reference to some other examples, like Lebanon. You remember very well when Saudi Arabia almost kidnapped Prime Minister Hariri in order to oblige him to take out from the government the influence of Hezbollah. We remember also the Qatar isolation by the quartet, Egypt, Bahrain, Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, with a boycott, isolation. And also, we remember the support that these countries gave to United States, the Trump administration, for the sanctions against Iran after the coming out from the nuclear pact. Also, I'd say, just to make a reference to Jordan, there is a certain, let's say, fear by Jordan that Saudi Arabia and Qatar could have the intention to take over the holy sites in Jerusalem. Qatar offered $1 billion in order to take care of the holy sites, and Jordan reacted with an agreement with the Palestinians at the beginning. And then also Saudi Arabia would be very tempted to have under his custody also the holy sites in addition to Mecca and Medina. So as you see, the kind of octopus attitude of the Gulf was very important in all the events in the region. Finally, I just want to take your attention, to draw your attention about the new phase we are witnessing now, because we have now a phase in which the Gulf states, all of them in practice, switch from a, let's say, military approach, hard power approach, to a more political, diplomatic approach. The key word for the Gulf to understand what they are doing now is de-escalation. There is a shift to politics. And why this? First of all, UAE started because here it realized that the shield by Trump was not as real as they expected. So when there was, if you remember, the issue of the drone, which was shut down by the Iranian, Trump was going to react to this very hastily, but UAE asked him not to do that because they were really exposed, and the Iranian had the intention to retaliate exactly on the UAE, destroying in practice the economy of Dubai and so on. So the American blocked themselves, and from that moment on, the UAE changed its attitude. And after, as you know, they had a political, let's say, stand coming, disengagement from Yemen, and also we can consider that at the end they had the Abraham Accord. Abraham Accord, which was really a very reasonable attitude with some advantages for them, cooperation, economic cooperation, technological cooperation, but also to make a kind of guarantee against the Iranian aggression. Last but not least, also to avoid the annexation of the occupied territories by Israel, and so having something to sell to the Palestinians. Now, the most important factor was the Biden factor. The Biden factor gave a decisive, let's say, push to this diplomatization of the Gulf. The most important sign was the reconciliation with Qatar, led by Saudi Arabia, but also the other followed, although not maybe so willingly. And so, at least potentially, this rift has been solved. Although, I think, in order to see practical, let's say, effect, we should wait. And then also the other situation calmed down. You see, in Syria, they try now to have Syria back to the Arab League, especially the UAE. In Libya, the UAE is less active, also Qatar is less active. In Yemen, the UAE disengaged, as I said, but also the Saudi Arabia asked for a peace plan. In the Horn of Africa, the UAE has closed the military base in Assab, also taking only the commercial port. With Iran, of course, the situation is less acute than before. And also, for example, Sudan, the situation is to some extent under control. The rivalry is still there, but there is a political solution to the point that Sudan also proposed the UAE as a kind of mediator for the issue of the dam between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. So as you see, we have now a change which is very important and which gives hope to some kind of, let's say, possibility for diplomacy to take the prevalence on the military action. I'll stop here, and if there is some question, of course, I can give some further explanation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was actually an ideal perspective to bring because the diplomatic and international aspects of this are so crucial, and so it's quite a good bookending, I think, from beginning with Ambassador Ferrara and coming around to yours at the end. I would like to give each of you the opportunity to just respond for 2 minutes. I know it's not enough time, but I don't want to go over much more out of respect for all of your schedules. But I do want to hear what you have to say briefly in response to one another. And I know that that you may well have something. So we'll just return in the same order, and I would ask you to really please just keep yourselves to 2 minutes. And first, Pasquale.
Thank you very much. I would like to elaborate on my previous intervention, taking into account the different observations, by stressing that this idea of changing the narrative between the Europe as such and the Mediterranean world, it's very important, but it should take into account new projects. I mean, in terms of innovation. So far, we have been stuck with migration, with energy, with terrorism. Maybe you have to inject in this dialogue new topics that at the moment may sound a little bit utopian, but are really very important for the people in the region and also for the European. First of all, the environment. So this energy transition, which is really important. By the way, we are proposing as the Italian government a memorandum of understanding with Libya related to renewable energies. So I think this is a sign that we are investing in the future rather than blaming what happened in the past. Second, the idea that we have to look into aspects like water. It was mentioned by Amr Hamzawy, the dam, the Great Renaissance of the Ethiopian Dam. So these are the crucial elements, not only the availability of water or everyday resources, but also the quality of the water, the quality of the air. People are fed up with the idea that they are condemned to live in a polluted environment. It is a political issue, and we Europeans, we should take into account that as a top political priority.
Thank you very much for that. Amr, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Jonathan, and everyone. Let me just address two brief points. A question was addressed to me in the chat regarding Patrick Zaki, who is an Egyptian human rights activist currently in detention in Egypt. And the question was, since the Italian Senate passed yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, a resolution to grant him Italian citizenship, how it would impact Egyptian-Italian cooperation. I believe Egypt and Italy have a strong economic and trade cooperation. Egypt and Italy have a strong cooperation in the field of natural gas. Italian companies have been leading the effort, the Egyptian effort in recent years to discover new fields in the Mediterranean shore of Egypt. Egypt and Italy have strong military cooperation and geostrategic cooperation in Libya, for example. I guess this is going to continue as it's been the case throughout the last years. What European partners can do at the government-to-government level is to, be it behind closed doors or in public, to address human rights concerns as they have done in recent years. But once again, I'm hoping for an improvement. There were some significant releases of detainees in Egypt in the last days. I'm hoping this trend will continue. and that the current government will figure out a way of opening up politics to an extent, or opening up the public space to an extent, and of granting amnesty and releasing detainees and prisoners such as Patrick Zoya. The second issue, which I would like to operate on, to end on a quick note, asking of Europe to, as the ambassador was just saying, to look at the future and to look ahead and to help the region find a mechanism for cooperation, be it in meaningful economic and social sectors, not only with regard to illegal migration, but with regard to renewable energy, with regard to looking at ways to eradicate poverty, which has been on the rise in many countries. Tunisia and Morocco are two cases in point, for example, and to once again help the region figure out ways, peaceful ways to solve conflicts of great magnitude. The potential water wars, and conflicts are one example, border conflicts are a second example, and figuring out ways of improving good governance without focusing only on electoral democracy is a priority as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amr. I now turn to Professor Aymen Bukhanmi.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you, before I start to comment, because I am not following the chat, as maybe some of you know that I am a blind person, so I could not effectively follow the chat. If there is any specific question, I'm afraid you have to ask it directly. Is there any specific question for me?
No, you can go ahead and
okay.
just make your concluding remark. Thank you, though.
Sorry for that remark, but I had to make sure that no one is expecting a direct answer. My concern is related to the future of democracy. This is important for the region, but it goes beyond the region. It is obvious that democracy has declined in terms of its attractiveness, maybe because some alternatives seem to appear on the horizon. Maybe people are focusing on technical issues such as transparency, efficient bureaucracy, forgetting the normative aspect of democracy. Being a Democrat myself, I am worried about this tendency to downgrade the importance of democracy, and to see that there are some alternative possibilities that are being gaining ground, especially in non-democratic countries, and even maybe in democratic countries, when I see the fascination that people are entertaining about a country like China because of its successes in fighting COVID-19, I am really not very happy. Of course, a situation of a crisis like COVID-19, I think in a situation like that, a regime like the Chinese one is more efficient than the messiness and the chaotic picture that democracies tend to give. But all the same, we need to be very careful here, and we need always to think about what democracy can deliver in order to make it great again. I'm borrowing from our friend that you know. Thank you very much.
Let me ask Federica now to say something before passing.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Personally, I'd like to address just one point and to look for the future about maybe another monograph or webinar. And I think that we should focus also our studies and analyze on the Sahel as another crucial ground for growing tensions between Turkey and Qatar and Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and also in some sort Iran. So we have absolutely to go on with our work and our meetings in the future. And thank you to all the authors and the speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Federica. Patrizio, would you like to have a final comment?
Yes, very telegraphically, I wanted just to draw your attention to another issue, which could be of relevance in the next months and years, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that we have some elements encouraging. First of all, Biden administration is giving more attention to the dossier, only going back to the assistance to Palestinian and to take back the relationship with the Abbas. But also, speaking about the Gulf, I think there is a strong interest by the Saudi Arabia to renew the so-called Arab Initiative of 2002, maybe updating it in order to give a contribution to a possible restart of negotiations. Also, Qatar could help a lot because of the Hamas connection in Gaza. And the UAE have some kind of connection, for example, Mohammed Dalan, who is anyway an actor in the Palestinian world. So I think that we can also count on the fact that if Saudi Arabia can solve the issue of Palestine, they can join, as they said, the Abraham Accord. And I think for Israel, that could be the completion of a strategic, let's say, design, which could really put it in a kind of very, very positive position. So I think that we can see some new development in this area. Last observation about the role of China and Russia in the area. I think it's very important not to forget this. Russia, more or less, we know it's present in Libya, in Syria, but China, I think, sometimes is underevaluated. When I was in the UAE, I was impressed by the influence by China, and is confirmed now by the fact that telecommunication, 5G, is totally in the hand of China in that region. Even Sinopharm is starting to produce vaccines in the UAE, which is also an important development in the vaccine diplomacy. And Oman is under strong influence by China. So we should, as European and as NATO, take a look at this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrizio. These are very enriching additions, and I think that there is really a clear set of issues for us to continue addressing. I want to thank each of you really very authentically and genuinely and sincerely for your time. It is very much appreciated. This recording will live on YouTube, and we will be sure to distribute it to our channels. I know that your insights are extremely welcome. And I thank you again, and I hope that we will see each other again very soon in person and not in this two-dimensional format. I look forward to shaking all of your hands again one day and to raising a glass of tea or a glass of wine. So thank you for being here.
A good Italian cappuccino.
Cappuccino. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
That's a compromise. That's a compromise.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye to everybody.